Hello, Premium Spirit Club members. We are going to go on a fun journey today. If you haven't already, take the three after dinner drinks. So that's going to be the port, the Madeira, and the sherry. Go ahead and pop those in the fridge while we taste through the first three flights, and then we'll bring them back at the end. So we're going to start with Mezcal, go to Scotch, then Bourbon, and then finish with the Fortified wines. I hope you're excited about this because I know I am. Mezcal! So Mezcal is probably my favorite category of alcohol, closely followed with whiskeys. But this is probably the first love of mine when I got to know spirits, alcohol, when I was first learning, probably back in 2006. So it's an old love of mine, but the practice of it is ancient and amazing. And we're going to go through three single varietal expressions of Mezcal, all from the same co-op called Banez. Obviously from Oaxaca, but this co-op is comprised of 35 different families. They're committed to sustainable growing and production, which is super important because at the current rate, especially the way the larger companies do it, we're going to be just not able to get Mezcal in the States within like 20 years, maybe even sooner. So the way these guys do it is amazing, and I think like once you taste this, you'll know, I think maybe a little bit of why these are so highly sought after, but also why these are about to go extinct, and why production of this is something that like takes a commitment to sustainability in order to ensure production for future generations. So let's start with Quiche. So Quiche, also known as agave Karwinski, this is a varietal that's sort of known for oftentimes like tropical fruit and like high acidity. All three of these have similar production methods, also in that they're like sort of an older style using like donkey poltojones. They will ferment usually in wooden vats and then in copper alembic stills. So, smelling, I do get instantly tropical notes. Passion fruit, like some notes of like coconut. It is fantastically tropical. So let's see if those high notes that this agave is known for come through on the palate. Yeah, it's deliciously dry. Really makes your mouth water. So if you're ever wondering whether something actually has a high acidic content, and like actually how to talk about that, it's like squeezing lemon juice on your tongue. If it makes your tongue water, you know it's acidic, because that's your body's natural reaction to acid. So this is one of those mezcals that is very easy to drink, and especially on a hot day, because you want to keep coming back to it, because it's not just the oils that's there. It's got a very nice like high notes of acid that have like been maintained throughout the distillation process. Moving on to the next one, the Arauqueño. This is probably one of my personal favorites here. Arauqueño is a massive agave plant that takes up to 25 years to fully reach maturity. This one has some stank on it. So I often say with agave like this, when it's wild fermented with native yeasts, the smells on it can just run wild, and this one is almost like barnyard adjacent. It's much more full, round bodied on the palate. Strong green notes, almost like tarragon, basil. That green of notes. Very stark difference between the first two. Moving on to the last one, the Tepechtate. Another one of my favorite varietals, but this is also one that takes 25 years to reach maturity. So I mean, if you can just imagine corn taking 25 years to grow, bourbon would be like $10,000 a bottle. This thankfully has a very high yield because of just how massive it is and the sugar content. But now this note is probably, of all of them, this one smells like cheddar to me. Almost like Gloucester cheddar, and it's like oily on the tongue. highly recommend for each of these, like, focus on the exhale for these because it brings out different notes. Because if I'm smelling Gloucester, like cheddar cheese, as I'm like smelling it, but then I taste it and it gets this like oily vegetable quality, the exhale is going to either combine the two or bring out third tertiary notes. And I think this does both. This is a high-end, like artisanal, small batch co-op production of some single varietals of Mezcal. Hope you enjoyed them as much as I did. Today we're looking at 3 single malt expressions of Scotch that live in the Speyside and the Western Highland region. The whole Speyside Highland micro-region, separate region debate is still active and raging, and I think it's kind of fueled by different blending companies and the narrative they want to push to us about Scotch. However, I think we're going to take a look at 3 pretty unique styles and ways of expressing these single malts, both with oak and age, and we're going to go 13, 14, and 15 in that order. So let's start with Craig Ellachie 13. I reported myself. Craig Ellachie 13 is one of the 5 single malts that go into a Dewar's blend. It is owned by Bacardi, and they've only sort of recently been putting their own expressions out there to the American market. Craig Ellachie 13 and 31 are the 2 that have been available, but the 31 much smaller stock obviously available, and the 31 was the one that won the best single malt in the world 4 years ago. So Craig Ellachie, what I love about the single malt is that it's one of those that is almost like an Oreo or a s'more, in that it has bookend notes that are very similar. Right away you smell like it's this honey. It's almost like a rich velvety palate. In the middle there's this like mid palate there's like a little bit of smoke presence. And it's a full-bodied malt, but not. I think that comes from the fact that it's non-chill filtered. But this is one of those, I think, scotches that, like, if you don't want to sacrifice on the flavor, but still want a scotch that's like drinkable in heat, like in the summer sun, this is like my go-to with that. But you can still drink it by like a campfire at 10 p.m. on Saturday night if you want. Oban. 14, West Highland. This has, I think, been on my list of like top 10 single malts for me to drink ever since this was on, I think, our opening Scotch flight list at Long and Eagle over 10 years ago. Very different nose. Get a lot more high notes in fruit instantly. Green apple. Wood chipping, but on palate it definitely changes. It becomes a little bit more closer to the Craig Ellachie. There's a little bit more orchard fruit going on there. Still a small hint of smoke in the middle. Little peat hints, just like dropped throughout. It's a really pleasant, easy drinking. I wouldn't say as enjoyable like in the sunlight as this. This is more of a late afternoon, early evening Scotch, or one that you could end your night with. More robust in flavor. I don't know if it's the extra year of aging that's actually going to give it this color. My guess is they probably put a little bit of caramel coloring in it because it's allowed. And I think you can kind of see just a difference in a non-chill filtered, but probably no color added. With this one having some, I think I can actually taste that too. A little bit of caramel note to it. Glenfiddich, 15. This is going to be, this is won an okay amount of awards. It is their Solera system that they use. This is touched sherry, it's touched ex-bourbon. The minimum age on the Solera that they use has to be 15 by law. But like right away when you smell it, it smells much more aromatic than either of the two. Very intense flavors, comparatively as far as a 15-year-old Scotch could be. If this one is like orchard fruit, this is orchard fruit that's been stewed. Has been like sitting out in the sun for a while. Definitely get like raisinated notes from the sherry. Baking spice comes through more in this one than in any of the others. But it's definitely like a noticeable and fun progression upwards as you go from sort of afternoon to like early evening to like a late night Scotch for me. That was, I guess, the fun in showing you just the age progression, oak progression, and style progression on these. Cheers. Weller? I hardly even know her. Okay, so today we're going to look at 3 weeded expressions from the Buffalo Trace Distillery. Some more famous. All of them are well regarded these days. So we're looking at Weller Antique, Old Rip, 10-year 107, and Van Winkle Family Reserve Lot B, 12-year expression. So these all reference and carry brand name over from the Stitzel Weller Distillery, which is probably the most well-regarded distillery in downtown Louisville in the 50s and 60s. They are all weeded bourbons, and J.P. Stitzel was the one who actually consulted to help Maker's Mark start their brand. So this is the brand responsible, I feel like, for it all as far as like weeded bourbons go. Obviously, this is part of the Pappy line. These are all hard to get, all delicious, but I wanted to taste them in order. Starting with Weller Antique 107. This used to be a 7-year mark with 7 on the label, but it's now non-age stated and ranging from 5 to 7 years old. The high proof on it is partly what gives it its deep, robust color. What I've always noticed about the Antique is that it gives off a very like candied orange note right away. Follows through on the palate with a heavy baking spice, vanilla, cinnamon forward. Almost like a morning bun or like an orange roll. Moving on to Old Rip 10-year 107. Proof. So a lot of folk have made the claim that Weller is just simply poor man's Pappy, or poor woman's Pappy. But I always argue against that because whiskey is at least 90%, at least bourbon is, oak management. And that's one of the things that Stitzel Weller Distillery sought out to prove in the 50s and 60s when they hired teams of people just to open and close the windows on their multi-floored aging facility to try to mimic like the rotation of barrels and the discrepancies that come in different heats and humidities, and then they blend them. So this is done to the specifications of the Van Winkle family and the Stitzel Weller line. So there are definitely similarities, but it's very also different. So here, instead of this like bright candied orange note, in the 10-year I get more like baking spice and like I get more like a fruited Danish. It's like a lot more like layers of vanilla and wheat. And on the palate, even though it's the same proof, this one tastes more nuanced in its like style. I get more layers of candied fruit. I get a burn in the back, but it's like it's a different textural feel in the middle. Moving on to the 12-year, the tasting of this is going to be different than the other two because it's lower proof. So it should just taste smoother right away, but sort of get past that, it clocks in right above 90 proof. Now this one to me is radically different. It's not just the proof. The this year's expression of the 12-year compared to the 10-year of this year, I feel like, and every year they sort of switch, I feel like, in quality. The 12-year this year is one of those superior expressions of the last 5 years. So I'm actually very, very happy with these. This is like, I mean, it's root beer, it's like cream soda, much more baking spice forward. focusing much more on those oak characteristics that tend towards that frosting, almost more than the fruits and pastries. Very, very pleasant, sippable, easy to drink. But for me, if I were to rank these, hot take, this year, I prefer the 107 and the 12 year over the 10. Just my hot take. I'm very curious what you think. Feel free to email me, let me know if you feel differently. Okay, fortified wines. This is one of my favorite categories. I feel like it's making a comeback. I love it. We use it in cocktails, and I'm getting more and more requests and calls for it just by the pour. So if you've never been introduced, I hope this is a really good introduction for you. But we're looking at 3 different ways of shelf stabilizing wine, and we're looking at Madeira, port, and sherry, and different expressions of each. So Madeira, just for those of you who don't know, when you Maderize wine, it's actually an accidental discovery. I feel like all of these are actually accidental discoveries, but it comes named after the Isle of Madeira, and of course during shipping we have wine that becomes spoiled through bacteria, and this Maderization, as it's become known as, creates a shelf stability so that at a certain point it's not unsafe to drink, and it's like it can't get any more inoculated, and it becomes desirable. So this Malvasia is one of the noble varieties of grapes from Madeira, and this is their one of the vintage expressions from there. Sometimes it's called Malmsey, you might know it as. But let's smell it and try it together. There are certain reasons why I particularly love a 15-year Malvasia. So you definitely get some of the things that you just normally get in shelf-stabilized wines or fortified wines in general, and that's like you get like raisinated notes. It just comes from the oxygen interacting with it, which is sort of what happens in tawny port. Like it's oxidized instead of Maderized. But in addition to that, this gives like almost like a maple syrup quality, both in texture and in flavor. The sweetness on here, which is absolutely present, is balanced in such a beautiful way with a high level of acidity that this can be consumed on its own, almost in a whole glass without feeling like, oh, I'm drinking like a sweet wine or an after dinner wine. This is something that is really good with like rich and robust. I feel like dark meats almost like with lamb, but it's something that I put in cocktails, and it's something that I would just drink on its own. Moving on to a 20-year tawny port. When I was working in fine dining at John George, the corporate pairing is always, if it's chocolate cake, you pair it with a ruby port, or like an unaged chocolatey port. These are so raisin forward. We pair this with like more like creme brulees or anything that's got caramelization on it. So this is obviously from Portugal, being port, Isle of Madeira. But if you're smelling and tasting this, it's not just a 5-year difference on here that I think does this, but this has like a creaminess to it that just comes from a different way of fortifying this wine. Definitely gets like balance, still has like high notes of acid, but this is definitely something that you would like drink as a dessert wine. It's not necessarily something that I would pair with any food before you get to the end of your meal, and when I put it in cocktails, I generally use it because of how the sugar content exceeds the acid content. Definitely has like nutty notes, almost like almonds present in there. It's very, very pleasant there. This PX sherry is batshit crazy, pardon my French. The Pedro Jimenez grape is sun-dried before it is brought into this, and I think, you know, if you're looking at my glass or your glass at home, you notice just how thick this wine is. Like soy sauce. It's like evaporated soy sauce. It's just thick. When you smell it, you get those crazy notes from it. I mean, obviously raisinated, because it's a raisin that makes this. but it is massively thick on the palate. This is one you get like 2 ounces of. You sip on those 2 ounces for like 15 minutes because it's so rich, so beautiful, and it's something that you like. You could pour over ice cream. You could pair it with your cheese. It is that lovely. But all three of these are some of my favorite things we carry at Common Good. They're very not known. We haven't even like really put them on the list to pour by the glass because we don't have that much of them. But we use touches of them in cocktails to really try to add depth and balance and complexity. So I hope that we are enjoying these after dinner fortified wines from Spain, Portugal, and the island of Madeira. I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. Cheers.